I'm Jason Valley with Psychedelic Scene, and I'm here today with Jason Simon of Dead Meadow. Thanks for
Hello?
being here.
Yeah, definitely.
This is the first time I've ever interviewed someone with the same name as me.
Oh, really? That's a
Yeah,
good bit of Jasons out there, I think.
yeah, quite a few. So, you guys released an album recently called Voyager to Voyager. And Dead Meadow has always stood at the crossroads of heavy riffs and psychedelic textures. What were the key influences, musical or otherwise, that shaped your sound early on?
I think Sabbath and Zeppelin, of course, are two of the main influences. But we really came out of not a heavy or a metal scene. We came out of a punk scene. We grew up in DC, and
Right,
when
I heard you had some connection with Fugazi.
yeah, that was kind of the world we were in. We were in Discord and like grew up listening to all that DC punk rock. And the previous bands had been more in line with post-punk type sounds. And I think, when the band before it was called Impossible Five that we did right out of high school, I did with Steve Killy. Uh, when that ended, there was a couple years and we're kind of figuring out what to do. And I think at that point, it just started to become like that angular post-punk sound and all that just started, I don't know, sounding kind of stale to us. And um, we've been listening to all sorts of music, definitely, smoking a lot of weed, so it kind of led it more in a psychedelic, uh, I don't know, listening to slower stuff. And then a roommate, Corey Shane, who actually joined the band for Feathers, he lived with Steve and I, and he was a huge Hendrix fan and had all these Hendrix videos and old Zeppelin and Sabbath videos. And just watching all those bands, was like, we got to get back to something like this, and like, and doing like 10-minute songs and having guitar solos and wah pedals was kind of a almost like the punkest thing that we could do. We were like excited to just free people out in DC, because it was coming from that era when a guitar solo, like what, like effects pedals, that was all like seen as like some sort of, it's very different from what was going on. And so there was an element of that. It was almost like let's freak out everyone around here. We're going to play these heavy riffs and get back to something more expansive and more imaginative and more, I don't know, something, a little bit more fantastical, than the I don't know, angular post-punk of the day.
Yeah. Well, my understanding is that you completed Voyager to Voyager prior to Steve Killy's death, almost
Mhm.
exactly 1 year ago.
Yeah, it's
Um,
it's pretty
yeah,
crazy. As I've been like a estate agent, like helping with like everything with his estate, and he had to sell his house, but it's pretty wild that it's actually closing, escrow's closing on the exact date of his death. It's pretty weird.
that is
But
weird.
yeah, April 18th. Um, but yeah, we recorded the whole record before, over pretty much through 2023, and we had a couple songs left to record at the beginning of 2024, and like a couple days, but he was starting to get pretty sick, and he's actually just diagnosed a couple like days before the last session that we did, but he was still playing well, but it was that, yeah, he definitely really finished it. It's pretty weird, as he the mixing and everything, pretty much, at the last, when we could, but that was it was good that, I was playing and everything and the writing and everything. He was definitely at his, still playing at full capacity, and all his creative input is in there.
Was there much post-production done on the album?
Uh, everything, we record everything live, and I try to do as much guitar as I can live, whatever guitar solos I can do. But yeah, then after, I definitely do add things where I feel they needed, other sounds, other guitar sounds, and in mixing, we took a little while mixing it, but nothing too
Yeah.
extreme.
Okay. I know you co-wrote songs with Steve. Can you walk us through what your songwriting process was like?
It varied from song to song. I think, in the early days, songs were a lot more riff based, like, okay, we're gonna play this part and then this part, and then we'll go to this part. And some songs are still like that, but I think as time progressed, it became more a little bit more song based, where I would have like, oh, I have this song, and it's kind of has these chords, and it goes here, and it goes there, and then we just would play together. And Mark and Steve would kind of develop their own parts based on us just jamming and playing together. So a lot of the songs, most of the songs would start with an idea or something of mine in some form, either being a full song or just on parts of songs. And just really organic, as we all played together, it become something that we liked and we thought was something to continue working on or not.
Yeah. Well, looking back at your earliest records compared to your more recent work, what do you think has changed the most?
Um, I don't know, that definitely, I think as we become better players, there's like, we write quicker, like we don't, I feel like some songs come together so fast because we're just like, oh, that's cool. Okay, I'll play this, I'll play that, and then no one's second guessing it. We can kind of tell if it's something we like, and we want to go with, or
Mhm.
uh, or not. Where certain earlier records, we worked it so many ways. Like, oh, let's try it like this. Maybe it'll be better like that. Oh, is that cool? What if we tried this? And I think now we kind of just know, and I never have to say anything to Steve and Mark. It's never like, oh, that seems weird. Try something else. Whatever they figure out to play or whatever they decide to play on is usually exactly what something that I think the song should have.
Yeah. There's a mystical, even literary quality to your lyrics. Are there authors or philosophies that you draw from?
Certainly, I think the early lyrics are a little more of a fantastical element to it, and that was kind of intentional, just to try to bring that kind of inner imagination, sort of escapism into like of music that could, I don't know, maybe paint some pictures in your head while you're listening to it, instead of the very political or like angular sounds that were around us in DC. Uh, authors that I've always loved in the early days that were influential were like H.P. Lovecraft and Clark Ashton Smith, and right now I like Thomas Ligotti a lot. It's cool, really cool horror writer. And then I also I studied religion in school in college, so different philosophies from that, from like Buddhism or some of the Islamic stuff and Sufism and different things, work their way in. And a lot of
Yeah.
it, like, it's 'cause always, I don't know, infinitely inspiring.
Okay. You recently signed with Heavy Psych Records, I believe.
Heavy
And
psych sounds, I guess they're called.
oh, Heavy Psych Sounds. Okay. It seems like a good fit for you guys, but I was wondering if you ever feel confined by the heavy psych genre.
A bit, but I've really have been very thankful that our fans seem to come from all different genres. To show it's not just stoner rock fans there. There'll be people coming from all sorts of worlds, and I'm really thankful for that. And I think that's a reflection of our own tastes. I think no one in the band really listens to that much of what you can consider heavy stoner rock. I think Sleep's great and but other than that, we don't doesn't go much farther than that. Heavy stoner music to me would be dub and reggae. So yeah, I guess with heavy psych sounds, it'll be interesting because this is the first record that we've really done on a label that is in that world. Well, no, actually, we did the last record, Force From Free, was also on a Blues Funeral, was also kind of more in a label from that world, and it actually did really well. So we'll see. I think we've been around long enough that our fans are just Dead Meadow fans. That doesn't really matter where the record comes out.
Yeah. All right. Well, your band is known for immersive, almost hypnotic quality. How do you approach translating the studio sound into a live setting?
Um, I guess you do it the best you can. I'm not a fan of, having all sorts of backing tracks or anything like that. I want it to be free to kind of go different ways and develop into something different. And I'm not overly concerned that the live version matches the studio version. I want the live version to be really cool, and play it and be great on its own. But if it has to be different because it's only with three people, then that's the way it'll be.
Yeah.
And the songs
I
always
could,
change over time, I feel like. uh like a lot of old songs, just slowly, okay, we played it very different than we used to, it kind of just happens organically, but that kind of keeps it interesting. Yeah.
that kind of covers my next question, which is, do you prefer the freedom of improvisation on stage over the precision of a structured performance?
And, I think you gotta balance it, because I definitely I like songs, I'm a fan of songs, and seeing a band just free form improvise can get kind of tiring to me. But I do like that the songs are open enough, at least a lot of them are open enough that there is freedom to push things further or do things different from night to night. And I don't think I could play these songs for as long as we have if there wasn't that space in there to try different things and to develop them as the years pass.
Yeah. Okay. You've worked with a few different producers and collaborators over the years, and I'm aware that Steve produced some of your albums. Is there
Mhm.
anyone now that you'd like to work with that you haven't worked with yet?
Um, but I don't know really. I'm definitely open to working with producers, and I think the last few records. Yeah, Steve definitely was the first to kind of dive into recording us, and then really learned how to do that. And then uh, I learned a lot of what I know now because I do a lot of it now from him. Uh, and we would have people mix it, but it was always kind of frustrating to me sometimes that I feel like it couldn't, certain aspects wouldn't come through the way I thought, or you get it close, but it's like, oh, we can't ask for another remix. It's pretty good, so it's drives me crazy mixing ourselves, but I think we're able to get closer to what we envisioned by doing it that way. And how good studio gear has gotten and how prices have come down and a lot of things that you can set up a studio and do it, mix a record at a home studio now in a way that you couldn't maybe 15 years ago. And so since the Nothing They Need, I guess that record we did up at Steve's, Force from Free was mixed at mine, and then this last one was mixed at mine.
What's your ideal recording environment? Studio, home setup, or like a remote cabin in the woods?
I kind of think a remote cabin in the woods, because you get the band up there and then everyone's just focused, on that, and there's no I don't know, life's not intruding in all different ways, so you can just focus on the project. But that's not always possible, and I think a balance, this record was definitely a balance between home studio and we went to a friend's studio who had a big room. I think tracking in a nice big room is really beneficial for us. So going to a studio and getting the drums and the live stuff down, and then maybe having the time at home, we're not worried about how much money to spend just being in a studio to really just sit with it and try different things and see what you can add here and there. And that's been the best way for us.
Yeah. You mentioned something about smoking weed in the early days, and I was wondering, um,
That was myself and Mark. Steve actually Kelly never did.
oh, you didn't? Okay.
No, never. Yeah.
Well, do psychedelics play a role in your creative process, either historically or more recently?
I mean, I think definitely like the experience and knowledge gained through psychedelics for sure. I think that it's a healthy thing. I don't take psychedelics that frequently, but I think a good like I don't know like trip reset. Sometimes it's really necessary. And usually from those experiences, definitely insight that I've gained. And it comes through in your creative process for sure. But it's not like oh we have to take acid to get into some zone to write it. But I think just of who I am and like learning life, that's definitely been a part, you know.
Okay. Did you did you conscientiously start off as a psych band, or I mean, you kind of touched on this, like you developed out of a punk scene, but
Yeah,
was making psychedelic music on your mind at the time?
definitely. We wanted to be a psychedelic band. There wasn't really anything that you could call a modern psych scene. And it was strange, in the early 2000s and even late 90s when we first started, because there wasn't really a playing shows. We were either playing in the middle of these punk shows, post-punk shows, or we
Uh,
were playing with these stoner rock kind of metal shows. And either one, we kind of were an outlier a bit, we didn't really fit exactly. And slowly over the years, all these bands started to come up, and pretty early on, we got a call from these people out in California that were digging it to come out and play some shows. And it was a band I'd heard of, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember the name. It's Brian Jonestown Massacre, and so we went out and played with them, and it was a funny era for them. It was great music, and the band was really great, but there'd be nobody at the shows. It was kind of like pre-dig, post their major label. But coming out to LA, I mean, them and the bands like the Warlocks and Spindrift, it was like, okay, there's a lot of people that are playing something different than us, but psychedelic music of a sort, and then bands like the Black Angels started years later, and all of a sudden there was this psych scene. I think we're more in line with, than a stoner rock or punk scene, of course.
Yeah. Uh, I think the band now consists of just you and Mark Laughlin,
Yeah,
who's the
yeah. I
original
mean,
drummer.
I'm trying to figure out. I do want to continue, and because I don't know what I need to play music, and I play solo. I do lots of projects, but you know, it's been 25 years building up Dead Meadow to something that can allow me to spend my time playing music. So I'd like to continue, but really feeling it out, because Mark, he over lockdown ended up starting back up as a lawyer. So he's pretty busy, and we've done some jamming with Steve McCarty recently, who played on the Matador records, who's great, and a friend of mine got Caleb. He's kind of just randomly. I was like, oh yeah, you do play bass, but then he's been great, So that's fit in, but honestly, for playing out of town, I'm still kind of sorting out what to do with drummers, and I don't want the band to be like a solo, like me, like a solo thing, Corey Shane from the Feathers record, I think, is going to come back for write some songs and do another record with two guitars, and we will have Steve and Mark play. So it
Yeah.
will
Well, did
continue.
Steve ever give you any indication about how he would feel if you continued as Dead Meadow?
No, because I don't think with Steve, if there's things that Steve didn't want to deal with, Steve would not deal with them. Like he was definitely like a uh I don't know. And then one of those things was the fact that maybe he might not make it through this, and he was just something he couldn't deal with, and even trying to bring anything up remotely like that was something that was like, he couldn't really talk about. And so I don't really know. I know I can think back of there's only one tour that at one point that I had to like bail out in the middle of it, and it was a long time ago, and I assumed they would just wouldn't do it. But remember Steven, like KP from Spindrift, jump up and play the shows. So I think back to that. So I was like, oh yeah, well they were on tour. They needed to make the money. The music, it went on. It seemed a little crazy, but uh, so I don't really know. I don't really know. I just at first I thought I would not do it, but then there's still more music, and like I'm talking to Corey and playing with Steve McCarty, having everyone involved. I think there's still more good music that we can make. I don't want to try to recreate what we had with Steve because that would be impossible. And then it's like Steve and I, we were 30 some years we made music together, and he was such a cool bass player. It was like he's really unique in the way he played and the way he thought, his creative processes. But yeah, so I want to still feel like Dead Meadow, and I know it can't be the same, but we'll see. I'll see if it feels good, and then we'll keep going. It feels right.
Right. So you're going to bring back the second guitarist that you had in the band for a while.
That's the idea. We've been talking and writing. We've been talking about doing something like that. I think that would be cool because, he was integral in forming the band too. Like I said, he lived with Steve and I, and really the whole ideas for the band came together when Steve, Corey, and I were all living together, watching these Hendrix videos and talking about, how we wanted to get back to something closer to that. So it does feel like it's tied to everything and with historically as well.
Have you put much thought into a bass replacement?
That's the strange thing is that kind of fell into place like really easy, like really like amazingly easy. Where I make music with a friend of mine who has a label called Jungle Gym. It's kind of an ambient instrumental cassette label, really cool stuff. But we have a project called Spectral Fields, and he'd put some bass on it every now and then. But I guess he was playing upside down because he was left-handed. But I was like, oh, you want to try jamming and see how it is? And he kind of a lot of times he knows the song better than I. He's like, oh no, this is how it goes. It's pretty funny. And so playing with him has been really cool, and it's actually been like in order to figure out how to do some shows, seeing it's more the drummer that we're trying to figure out for out of town stuff. Because recording, I would definitely want Mark or Steve McCarty, which we reconnected with, or I reconnected with at the memorial for Steve. I hadn't seen him in a while. It's been really cool playing with him because they're both such great, unique drummers.
Yeah. Do you anticipate touring at any point in the near future?
I kind of when I was playing with Steve McCarty and then this this guy Caleb on bass, Steve McCarty was thinking about touring for a while, and I actually I kind of agreed to some Europe shows, and then it eventually turned out Steve McCarty couldn't do it, but these shows are already booked. So yeah, we're gonna be over in Europe in June. So I'm gonna try some shows, and I have a friend playing drums, and you know, see how it is. In U.S., we're gonna play. The first show we're gonna play is sometime in the summer. We'll be with Mark and with a lot of friends joining up, kind of like a tribute to Steve. Uh, but I guess I'm gonna feel out how it feels in Europe. You know, I want to honor these commitments, but if it feels, I don't know, see how it is. You know, I'm a little bit. I don't know, a little nervous on the whole thing because it's strange. You know, I want to keep going, and I feel like
Yeah.
this record's cool. I want to share these songs with people, and I want to keep playing music. And this is something that worked a long time to make it into something that does make enough money and can support itself. So I don't know,
Yeah.
day by
I-
day.
I'm sure it's very difficult, and you have my deepest condolences about
Thank you.
Steve, who it sounds like he was a good friend in addition to a bandmate.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been so long as family. You know, it's just like with Mark and pretty much everyone in the band. You know, after traveling the bands together for so long and everything. You know, it's crazy.
All right, Jason. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you for doing the interview. Appreciate it.
Yeah, the new album Voyager is out. I think it's on all streaming services, and
It's everywhere now.
yeah.
So
Okay. Well, thanks so much.
great. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.